The Coop's western threshold offered a tactical vantage point that no amount of straw bedding could compromise. Cluck stood rigid against the wooden slat, his obsidian claws gripping the damp timber like talons forged in steel. Through modified binoculars calibrated to detect infrared heat signatures, the northern ridge periphery had transformed into a topographical battlefield. Thermal blooms pulsed in stark crimson against the cool blues of dawn mist. 3 distinct aerial platforms were converging, their engine exhaust painting ghostly plumes across the upper canopy. Mother Hen's retaliation was no longer theoretical. The wind carried the metallic tang of approaching machinery. It was descending. Inside the coop, Winston sat hunched over a topographical map spread across a discarded feed sack. The pig operated with the grim focus of a cryptanalyst who had seen too many harvest seasons pass without question. Every movement was measured against the clock, every shadow weighed for tactical advantage. Cluck's sharp clucks translated to a steady stream of positional updates. Henrietta, positioned at the primary router junction, converted each rhythmic peck into digital telemetry, her comb twitching as she fed the data streams into the cipher patch verified against Agri-Shell records. The operation ran on shared command authority, a silent pact forged in the quiet hours before the sun breached the hedgerow. The farmer shuffled past the threshold with a wrench and a half-eaten scone, entirely oblivious to the tactical grid forming behind his legs. To him, it was merely coop maintenance. To Cluck, it was operational necessity. Then the air fractured. A high-pitched whine tore through the coop's temporary comms relay, shattering the synchronized flow of data. Electronic interference spiked like a live wire dropped into a puddle, severing the tactical link between Cluck and Henrietta mid-briefing. Static hissed across the frequency, swallowing the final coordinates before they could lock into the routing matrix. Cluck's head snapped sideways, one eye narrowing as he registered the sudden silence on the channel. The interference was deliberate. Mother Hen had finally learned to jam her own network. He clicked his beak twice, a sharp diagnostic signal that died in the noise. Professional patience warred with avian instinct. Winston supplied the decryption key, tapping frantically against the wooden floorboards as he bypassed the dead relay. He cross-referenced the corrupted drone telemetry with decrypted supply manifests, his dark eyes widening behind thick spectacles. The fragmented data coalesced into a chilling blueprint. The manifest details were not guesses, they were engineering orders. The syndicate wasn't merely scouting structural weak points anymore. They were weaponizing the geothermal vent network beneath the northern ridge. A coordinated neural harvesting pulse, amplified through dormant irrigation lines and broadcast across every acre of soil. Winston snorted, exhaling damp earth that fogged his glasses as he traced the pressure valves on the page. They were tuning it for maximum yield. Cluck processed the translation with icy precision. He did not need the full schematic to understand the timeline. The vents would be converted into a functional broadcast array within hours. Without immediate intervention, the entire property would be reduced to a control matrix. The peaceful rhythm of mowing cycles and poultry shows was merely a countdown mechanism dressed in pastoral fabric. He adjusted his stance, wings tucking tight against his flanks as he recalibrated his threat assessment. Instinct screamed to flee, but discipline anchored him to the timber. True professionals arrange the scenery, not merely react to it. He calculated load-bearing stress points, ventilation shafts, and the precise moment the automated feeders would cycle. Through the binoculars, the thermal signatures locked into place. Mother Hen's aerial surveillance drones successfully mapped the primary geothermal vent access points, their targeting lasers painting precise grid coordinates across the ridge bedrock. The platforms hovered in a synchronized formation, pulsing with a rhythmic amber light that cut through the morning fog. Cluck recognized the pattern instantly, a final synchronization sequence. The drones were signaling a ground extraction team to mobilize. Time contracted to a single, irreversible window. The silence over the comms channel was no longer an obstacle. It was a confirmation. The shadow of the silo had already fallen, and the convergence was absolute. No retreat was possible. The perimeter held, but the perimeter would not be enough to stop what came next. Static hissed through the Coop's nervous system like a nest of vipers wrapped in barbed wire. Cluck felt the interference as a physical weight, a pressure behind the comb that threatened to drown the tactical frequency. The comms were dead, severed by the electronic jamming Mother Hen had deployed from her northern ridge perch. To the uninitiated, it was merely background noise. To the Bantam, it was a blackout curtain descending on the battlefield. Cluck's eyes narrowed, amber irises contracting as he assessed the wiring harness coiled near the nesting boxes. The conductive gap was visible, a frayed copper end dangling from a junction box, severed by the surge that had fried the sonic emitter. Restoration required manual intervention. A professional did not wait for the signal to return. He became the signal. With precise, jerky movements that would have looked like a seizure to the untrained eye, Cluck scrambled onto the wooden frame. He gripped the insulation with talons honed by years of perching in hostile environments and hopped toward the gap. The interference spiked, a wave of white noise threatening to disorient his equilibrium. Cluck flared his wings, maintaining balance against the electromagnetic gust, and drove his beak downward. Metal met metal. A spark leaped, singing the tip of a feather on his throat, but the circuit closed. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards. The comms network flickered back to life, stabilizing with a soft warble. Cluck released the bridge, stepping back to groom a disheveled rumpel as if he had merely adjusted his plumage after a vigorous dust bath. Henrietta's voice crackled in his auditory canal, crisp and devoid of static. Bridge secure. Signal strength at 80%. The jammer is still active, but we have a channel. Acknowledged. Cluck clucked, the sound translating via the relay into coherent syntax. Diversion protocol requires immediate execution. Gerald remains unaligned. Locate the asset and assign the silo approach vector. Henrietta did not hesitate. She launched herself from the roost bar, wings beating a rhythm of purpose as she navigated toward the livestock pasture. The goat was likely already causing trouble. Containing his chaos required less discipline than directing it. Henrietta found him near the hay bales, gnawing aggressively on a length of garden hose. Her commands were sharp, pragmatic. Gerald's role was simple: charge the Northern Ridge access road with enough enthusiasm to blind the syndicate's optical sensors. He would mistake the tactical objective for a structural threat and destroy both with equal zeal. Meanwhile, Cluck turned his attention to the mechanics of annihilation. The conspiracy relied on complexity. The counter-operation required elegance. Cluck moved to the Coop threshold, peering toward the machinery shed where Winston stood snorting at a schematic he had dragged in from the mud. The pig's eyes widened as Cluck approached, and he trotted over to guide the rooster's gaze toward the adjacent fields. "The chain," Winston grunted, his voice transmitted through the modified wire mesh. "Agri-Shell expects linear resistance. We give them kinetic cascade." Winston directed Cluck's attention to the irrigation pumps humming in the south field, their gears waiting for a push. Beyond them lay the grain elevators, their chutes poised like loading mechanisms. And finally, the farmer's tractor, parked with the keys left in the ignition, a habit born of benevolent negligence. "Link the pumps to the elevators," Cluck clucked, his mind racing through load-bearing calculations. "Use the elevator counterweights to trigger the tractor's hydraulic lift. The momentum will carry through the silo's structural weakness." Winston nodded vigorously. "I have the decryption key for the supply manifests. Agri-Shell is routing heavy tonnage to the ridge. They are reinforcing the lockout." Cluck returned to the blueprint, a collection of pebbles and twigs arranged on the Coop floor. He began to shift the markers with his beak, calculating timing windows measured in heartbeats and gear ratios. The cipher patch remained active against Agri-Shell data, predicting the syndicate's response patterns. They would expect a breach. They would not expect a domino effect orchestrated by farm equipment. Timing window established, Cluck clucked, finalizing the arrangement. Pump engagement at 040. Elevator drop at 042. Tractor release at 045. The kinetic chain will collapse the silo's relay receiver before they can deploy the extraction team. Henrietta returned, her feathers ruffled but her composure unbroken. Gerald is aligned. He believes he is attacking a metal monster. Distraction is set. Cluck surveyed the completed arrangement of stones and sticks. The backup relay hummed steadily in the walls, granting them shared command authority over the diversionary path and the automated systems dormant within reach. The trap was wired. The scenery was set. All that remained was for the actors to arrive. Command confirmed, Cluck clucked, his voice steady as iron. We hold the line until the moment of impact. The wind off the northern ridge carried the metallic tang of impending violence. Cluck Norris stood at the edge of the livestock pasture, his crimson comb catching the weak morning light as he assessed the tactical landscape. The electronic interference still pulsed through the Coop wiring, a staticky hum that made Henrietta's comms chirp with occasional bursts of white noise. Shared command authority remained active, a fragile bridge between species spanning the gap of instinct and strategy. Every feather on his body was primed for deployment, every muscle coiled tight against the unpredictable variables of farm life. Gerald was positioned along the ridgeline, his hooves churning the mud into a chaotic slurry. The goat stared intently at a survey tripod standing sentinel over the northern access road, mistaking its geometric precision for an affront to bovine dignity. With a bray that shook the dew from the nearby hay bales, Gerald charged. He plowed through the scrub brush, his momentum carrying him straight into the support leg of a rusted shopping trolley abandoned by tourists years ago. The metal groaned, then shrieked as the wheels broke free from their rusted hinges. With a clatter that echoed like artillery fired down the valley, the trolley careened across the extraction road, wedging itself firmly between two drainage culverts. Cluck observed the diversion take hold with professional detachment. Across the ridge, he could see the tactical shift in the syndicate guards' formation. Their armored transport idled at the roadblock, engines whining as drivers scrambled to assess the obstruction. The extraction route was compromised, rerouting was inevitable. Now, for the machinery cascade. He noted the precise angle of sunlight reflecting off their weapon sights, a detail that would prove crucial when they returned from the detour. Cluck turned his attention to the silo exterior, where the irrigation control box sat exposed to the elements. He had spent hours rigging the conductive lines during a momentary lapse in the farmer's poultry show preparations. With a precise kick of his spurs against the manual override lever, he engaged the primary pump. Water roared into the pipes, rushing through the copper conduit toward the grain elevator. The sudden hydraulic pressure slammed into the counterweights, initiating the slow, grinding lift of the silo doors. But the operation demanded precision, and nature abhorred precision. The farmer materialized from the toolshed, squinting against the glare of his new cordless drill. He marched toward the old John Deere tractor parked near the irrigation junction, muttering about a jammed hitch that refused to budge. Cluck watched in mounting horror as the large man leaned into the machinery, applying torque to a lever that Cluck had explicitly wired to trigger the secondary vent release. The sheer unpredictability of human agricultural maintenance was a variable no briefing could account for. The tractor hitch groaned and gave way. The farmer's weight shifted, driving his boot down onto the exposed wiring harness. A spark jumped the gap, grounding Cluck's manual trigger prematurely. The feedback screamed through the geothermal vent network, a violent spike of pressure that rattled the silo's rivets. Henrietta's voice crackled in Cluck's auditory canal, stripped of static for a crucial second. Load is spiking on the eastern relay. Divert it. Cluck tracked Henrietta's instructions to the coop roof, where she had already bridged the main breaker with a length of galvanized conduit. She channeled the excess electrical load through the lighting grid, flooding the barn interior with blinding halogen glare. The immediate blowout was averted, but the system groaned under the strain. The geothermal pressure valves shuddered, their safety seals pushed to the brink by the unintended mechanical feedback loop. The diversion had successfully drawn the syndicate guards away from the primary vent controls, but the farm itself was now teetering on the edge of catastrophic failure. Cluck adjusted his posture, wings taut against his flanks, calculating the next sequence while the pressure gauges climbed toward the red. Every second stretched into an eternity of ticking dials and groaning metal. Silo base groaned under the strain of a pressure spike that threatened to tear the agricultural machinery chain apart at its weakest joints. Steam hissed through cracked valves, coating the concrete floor in a thick, sulfurous fog. Above them, the geothermal vent network pulsed like a dying heart, its rhythm erratic and violent. Cluck stood on a rusted catwalk, his feathers ruffled by the gale of escaping steam, eyes narrowed behind the grime-streaked goggles he had fashioned from discarded greenhouse panels. The pressure gauge trembled toward the red zone. If it burst now, the resulting collapse would bury the syndicate's staging area but level Muddington Acres with it. A professional does not accept collateral damage when an elegant solution exists. But first, they needed time. Through the static-choked comms relay, a sharp digital chirp cut through the noise. Winston's voice crackled, strained but precise. He had been buried in the Coop relay station server racks for hours, his snout pressed against cooling vents as he worked. The decryption key for the agri-shell supply manifests was already in hand, and now it served a far more immediate purpose. Cluck watched the monitor bank flicker as Winston code breached Mother Hen abort protocol. The traitor had detected the tactical deviation and initiated her extraction sequence, ready to sever the vent network and flee the farm before the fallout hit. But Winston was faster. He injected a looped signal into her control interface, freezing her command hierarchy in place. Her remote abort sequence hung suspended, trapped in an endless digital echo. Henrietta head snapped up from a bundle of stripped copper wire. She understood immediately. The path was clear. Cluck moved. He dropped from the catwalk onto the primary conduit, his claws finding purchase on greasy grating. The vent regulator loomed ahead, a massive wheel seized by decades of neglect and sudden thermal expansion. With a guttural cluck that sounded suspiciously like a war cry, he wedged his modified poultry feeder lever into the gear housing. The metal groaned in protest. Cluck threw his entire body weight against the handle, every muscle in his legs straining as he fought the hydraulic pressure. He felt the gears bite, then slip, then catch again. Slowly, agonizingly, the wheel turned. The hiss of steam shifted pitch, dropping from a shriek to a deep, resonant hum. The pressure gradient inverted. Instead of venting outward into the atmosphere, the superheated vapor was diverted downward, channeling directly into the grain elevator drive shaft. The machinery chain shuddered, then stabilized. The chaotic oscillations smoothed into a rhythmic, driving pulse. Cluck released the lever, his chest heaving. He had converted a catastrophic failure into a directed kinetic amplifier, but the system still required a physical trigger to synchronize the impact. That was where Gerald came in. Henrietta scrambled up the maintenance ladder, her feathers puffing out as she navigated the swaying walkways. She reached the secondary access platform where Gerald was already pacing nervously, his hooves clattering on the metal. The goat eyes were wide with unspent energy. Henrietta gave a sharp series of coos and pointed a wing toward a towering stack of hay bales positioned directly over the primary heat exchanger conduit. Gerald understood. He didn't hesitate. With a tremendous leap, he launched himself into the air, landing squarely on the precarious stack. The bales shifted, then toppled in a cascading avalanche of dry straw and twine. They crashed onto the primary conduit below, shattering the thermal shielding and forcing the excess kinetic energy to surge along the reinforced tracks toward the syndicate staging area. The entire silo vibrated with a unified mechanical roar. Pipes flexed, gears meshed with terrifying precision, and the geothermal network hummed at a frequency that made the concrete walls tremble. The machinery chain was no longer fighting itself. It was poised to deliver a massive, synchronized mechanical impact rather than a structural collapse. Cluck watched the readouts climb steadily, his expression unreadable behind his goggles. He had successfully inverted the pressure flow. The farm-hidden infrastructure was now a weapon aimed squarely at their enemies. Henrietta landed beside him on the catwalk, panting slightly but radiating quiet satisfaction. She tapped her wing against the comms panel one last time, confirming that Mother Hen remote abort sequence remained locked out by Winston looped signal. The tactical partners shared a look across the vibrating grating. They had stabilized the cascade. They had adapted the plan. And now they waited for the storm to break. Cluck stood before the grain elevator's primary tension pin, his red comb stark against the grease-stained iron. The kinetic amplifier thrummed beneath his claws, a dormant beast awaiting the final whisper of command. Mother Hen's abort sequence had been locked out by Winston's decryption key hours ago. Now, only physics remained. Through the corrugated siding, he could hear the syndicate extraction team, 4 men in tactical vests laughing about their easy score, completely unaware that the floor beneath them was a loaded spring, and the trigger was a rooster with a grudge against incompetence. One of the operatives tapped his earpiece, frowning as static hissed back, oblivious to the avian architect measuring the arc of his own triumph. A professional does not shout. A professional arranges the geometry of defeat, though Cluck privately believed that theatricality enhanced the lesson. He leaned his full weight against the release lever, his beak finding purchase on the cold metal with practiced precision. With a sound like a sighing ghost, the tension pin disengaged. The domino sequence began. Grain erupted from the hopper, cascading into the irrigation lines that Winston had jury-rigged to conduct electricity and hydraulic pressure in equal measure. The grain elevator's drive shaft groaned, transferring torque through the reinforced hay bales. Cluck and Henrietta had spent weeks reinforcing with stolen steel cable. Each bale compressed and rebounded with the resilience of a coiled spring, amplifying the kinetic energy until the entire northern ridge shuddered in anticipation. Scaffolding near the silo exterior buckled under the sudden vibration, collapsing in a controlled avalanche of metal pipes that landed with theatrical precision around the staging ground. The hay bales acted not merely as cushion, but as a leveraged fulcrum for disaster. Each impact sent a shockwave through the reinforced concrete floor, causing the syndicate's heavy equipment to shudder and slide toward the drop zone. A nearby tractor, its gears engaged by the irrigation pumps, lurched forward, its tires biting into the mud as it became a runaway juggernaut guided only by gravity and Cluck's calculations. Compressed air vents hissed open, releasing plumes of white steam that blinded the syndicate team just as the first grain sacks, weighed down by loose bolts. Henrietta had rigged to the pulley system with her own beak, swung from the rafters like pendulums of doom. The extraction team scrambled, boots slipping on hydraulic fluid sprays triggered by the tractor's proximity sensor hitting a ruptured valve line. They fired their weapons uselessly at the shadows until Henrietta's shadow shifted against the Coop window, signaling the final pulley clicked home. A weighted canvas sheet descended with impossible accuracy, enveloping the syndicate operatives in a cocoon of twine and nylon. They tumbled together, unharmed but hopelessly entangled, sliding across the wet concrete until they came to rest against a stack of feed bags, groaning at the sheer inconvenience of their capture. The lead agent peeked out from the mesh, eyes wide as he locked gazes with Cluck, who stood motionless atop the control box, offering only a slow, deliberate blink of professional satisfaction, his internal monologue noting that the capture was as elegant as it was inevitable. Meanwhile, the geothermal pressure valves, relieved of their weaponization load by Cluck's vent regulator override, safely dumped their excess steam into the reinforced silo chamber. The circuit completed. The weaponization array died with a whimper rather than a bang, its power drained to stabilize the farm's infrastructure. On the ridge, aerial surveillance drones listed drunkenly as Mother Hen's control interface flatlined, forcing her retreat to the shadows of the tree line. Then came the finale. The grain elevator's counterweights slammed home, triggering a secondary mechanical interaction that Cluck had deemed aesthetically necessary despite its tactical redundancy. The pressure cookers, rigged to the silo door, detonated in a cascade of colored smoke and deafening clatter, one cooker shaped suspiciously like a bantam rooster popping its lid with finality. Filled with flour and confetti salvaged from the farmer's failed anniversary party, they erupted in a cloud of white powder and festive debris that coated the silenced operatives in a layer of sugary humiliation. It was a spectacular, entirely unnecessary explosion, designed less to neutralize targets already secured and more to assert dominance through sheer auditory flair. Metal plates rattled, clouds of harmless dust billowed. The farm's perimeter alarms blared in perfect harmony with the chaos, and the gentle tinkling of falling spoons followed, another of Cluck's unnecessary touches. Cluck adjusted his feathers, unfazed by the noise. The extraction team was neutralized, the geothermal array grounded, and Mother Hen's network severed. He turned to Henrietta, who nodded from her perch atop a milk churn, their shared command authority humming in the silence that followed the roar. The farm was secure, standing triumphant against the encroaching dawn. The dust settled over Muddington Acres like a heavy quilt of grey ash and dried corn husks, slowly drifting down to coat the twisted remains of the syndicate's extraction team. Silence returned to the farm, broken only by the rhythmic hiss-click of cooling valves and the distant drip of water from the grain elevator's displaced counterweights. Cluck perched on the top rail of the perimeter fence, his feathers ruffled, but his posture immaculate. He regarded the scene with the detached satisfaction of a conductor after a particularly loud symphony. The kinetic cascade had done its work. The machinery was still, the extraction route obliterated by a completely unnecessary explosion that served no practical purpose other than theatrical finality. A gravel crunch announced the arrival of the farmer. He stepped onto the scene, wearing his best tweed waistcoat and holding a clipboard, completely oblivious to the tactical victory that had secured their existence. He blinked at the tangled mess of tractors and scaffolding, squinting against the morning light. "Blimey," he muttered, tapping his pen against the board with genuine excitement. "Must have been a pressure surge in the boiler room again. But look at that. The new rust inhibitors are working wonders on the silo's aesthetic, a patina of organic oxidation right where I wanted it." He waddled over to a smoking hydraulic line, tapping it affectionately. "And this vibration-dampening system? Brilliant engineering. It shakes just like the old water pump did in '98. Good work, everyone. Or, good physics." Cluck turned his head toward the coop door, where Henrietta stood amidst the scattered nesting straw. The electronic interference that had threatened to sever their link was gone. The comms relay hummed with steady, verified clarity against the Agri-Shell cipher patch. She clucked sharply, her voice crisp in his receiver. "Perimeter secure. Gerald has debriefed and is currently eating the evidence near the goat pen, which is statistically optimal behavior for asset concealment." She paused, her eyes glinting with a new gravity. "Your command authority is acknowledged, Bantam. The network holds. We have established a reliable operational framework that transcends species barriers." Cluck nodded once, a gesture of profound professional respect. "Shared command confirmed, Henrietta. The interspecies relay proved robust under load. Muddington Acres remains intact thanks to our coordinated response." Near the collapsed supply crate, Winston waddled with serious purpose, his trotters clicking against the gravel as he inspected the captured syndicate hardware. The pig adjusted a makeshift headset derived from a milk pail and copper wire, his snout twitching as he processed the data stream. "Inventory complete," he grunted, his voice transmitted through the farm's internal line with gruff pride. Agri-Shell manifests match the debris perfectly. However, the neural harvesting components are of significant value. I have already initiated the repurposing sequence. The synaptic amplifiers are now driving a high-yield compost accelerator. Mother Hen's technology will finally serve the soil rather than exploit it. The resulting humus will be magnificent. The eastern ridge began to bleed the first pale hues of dawn, washing the twisted machinery in soft gold and pink. The immediate threat was neutralized. The open threads regarding Mother Hen's aerial surveillance and the geothermal vent weaponization remained potential hazards, but the farm itself was safe. Cluck felt the familiar pull of routine returning. Even a professional assassin required sleep, and the drama of the night demanded the mundane anchor of morning. He took flight, his wings beating a steady rhythm against the cooling air, and circled back to the coop. He settled onto his usual roost, tucking his claws under his breast feathers as the sun crested the hill. The farm animals stirred with the waking light. Chickens preened, a sheep bleated lazily in the distance. Cluck blinked, his internal monologue shifting from tactical analysis to the simple considerations of grain distribution and predator awareness. He was Cluck Norris again, just a rooster on a peaceful British farm. Or at least, that was how it appeared to the untrained eye. Then a shadow fell across the coop window. A carrier pigeon landed on the fence post with the heavy thud of urgent intent. It did not coo, it tapped a rhythmic code against the wood, its eyes sharp and focused. Cluck's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. He hopped down, approached the fence, and pecked at the canister strapped to the bird's leg. The encrypted contract burned in his mind before he even broke the seal. The conspiracy had not ended, it had merely paused for sunrise.